Um, and we're live,
Great.
I think. I'm just going to take it as an article of faith that we're live because it says we're live.
I will tweet out the link.
Okay.
Yep.
It is 5 o'clock. It is Saturday, April 5th. Oh, April 4th. It is Saturday, April 4th. I have a glass of scotch. Kate appears to have, what are you drinking? What is it?
It's a Harpoon IPA.
Aha. Kate has a beer, and we don't have fun anymore in Washington or in Cape Cod, but in lieu of fun, there's this at 5 o'clock every day. So here we are. We don't have a guest today, but we do reserve the right to elevate anybody we see from the audience into the conversation at any time. It's kind of like the rapture. We just grab you and lift you up into the heavens. And so actually I'm going to do that right away with Vishnu Kannan, who is Lawfare's former intern, student at Michigan State. And I just saw him here and thought it would be cool to say hi. So how are you doing, Vishnu?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. Where are you? Are you, I assume you're like studying remotely?
Yeah, I'm still on my apartment just off campus. Yeah, just like conducting my own mini review of the Afghan war for a paper for class, and that's how this is going.
And how isolated are people in Lansing / East Lansing, Michigan?
Pretty isolated. Campus is dead, deader than some are dead, which is encouraging, I think, as a matter of public health. Yeah, everything's kind of slow. I don't think there's a dramatic drop off just because East Lansing is a relatively quiet place anyways, but yeah.
And what are you like? Michigan's definitely one of the states that's got an up and coming, very serious problem. How are you seeing that from where you are? Is that mostly a Detroit thing, or is it or are you seeing day-to-day evidence of that?
Yeah, no, I think it's mostly a Detroit thing as of now, but I imagine because we're starting to get people, 2 hops out, people who are affected by this, 2 or 3 hops out, and so I think as this goes further, it's going to start to affect places like Lansing too, but right now it's pretty confined.
And
are you from Detroit, Michigan originally, or Detroit or Michigan originally?
Yeah, I'm from Ann Arbor, so
okay.
I grew up there and came to school at State.
What's it like to grow up in Ann Arbor and then go to Michigan State?
My sense is that the betrayal hasn't been as big because my family's aren't huge football people. But for some of my friends, I think there's persistent tension when you go home. I just never felt that.
Cool.
Well, excellent. Do you have any great words of wisdom from before we dismiss you?
No, I've got questions for y'all, but I'll ask them.
Oh, well, no, ask them.
Okay, cool.
Questions count.
Questions count, cool. So this is a weird scholarship question, but you both have studied and written about things that were pretty niche, and you seem to have gotten there well before the general public or even the scholarly community got there. So Ben, I'm thinking about your early stuff on the FISA court. Kate, I'm thinking about, online speech and disinformation, or sorry, not disinformation, but online speech generally, well before it was in the public consciousness. So one, how did you go about finding niche areas like that, or were they kind of accidental? And then 2, as a broader thing, in your kind of early in your career, how much control did you try to exercise over the direction of your scholarship? And did you succeed?
Oh, I love this question. Ben, I feel like we've had this conversation about each
Indeed.
of our paths, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's thank you, Vishnu, for that. We're gonna put you back in the audience, and then Kate will start, and then I'll give some thoughts on that as well. Good to hear your voice, man.
Thanks. Good.
Yeah, thank you so much for such a great question. You know, Ben, you and I have talked about this in the context of you know, having credentials or being credentialed and feeling or not, and feeling like an imposter when you follow kind of your gut or what you think is like something that is super interesting. And I think that we have both talked about how we came up against a lot of opposition and had I did anyways, like I had huge moments of doubt. Like I've talked openly about the fact that like in the course of doing my PhD work at Yale, like even though I was at Yale, I like never felt like I belonged there. And I never felt like I was supposed to be there. It was huge imposter syndrome. And I think I had this one moment where I had worked on the paper that became the new governors, and I had submitted it and gotten failed as my seminar paper. Went on to get published in the Harvard Law Review, but it got failed for my seminar paper because the two professors that were teaching me did not think that it was proper legal scholarship. And I remember just sobbing on the floor of my studio apartment, and like I had spent 9 months of empirical research and writing and rewriting at that point, and my partner was just like, get up, and the only way you can like prove anyone wrong is to just keep working. And if you do a good job according to you, and you think this is interesting, like it'll be fine. Like there will just like you know, maybe you won't have like it won't like have some great breakthrough. Like we didn't think that it would ever get published in a place like Harvard, but there was just the idea that like you can't go so wrong if you work really, really hard and you love what you're doing and you think it's, you know, and I think that that's the only thing. Like I'm fascinated by everything that I do. And when I'm not, I don't do it. Like that is kind of the wonderful thing about academia. I mean, and that's also how I knew that I was going to go into academia. It was like I would be sitting in a firm and they would make me like research some topic, and I would kind of get it up enough to like finish the memo, and like, but I didn't really care. And like, it just didn't turn my crank. And like, the same thing was like, yeah. So, I mean, it's a great question, but I think it's just an evolution of like having confidence in yourself and trusting yourself. And after a while, enough times, if you're lucky, like enough times you take a risk and it pays off. And then you know the next time to trust your instincts. But I still struggle with that all the time. Like, I wonder if like, there's also a fair amount of like luck, right, Ben?
Yeah, and your example of the FISA, my FISA work in the 90s is a really great example of, I don't know what percentage of it was insight and what percent was luck, but it was a substantial amount of luck. I got interested in the institution of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court at a time when literally nothing had ever been written about it of consequence. And it was so understudied that when I asked the people in the Justice Department whether I could go see it, they were like, well, sure. And they actually showed me, I think I'm the only journalist who's ever like walked inside the FISA court. And it was because it was so understudied. Now, did I have some kind of instinct that, yeah, this thing might turn out to be important? Yes, I did. Did I have the same instinct about a lot of things that didn't turn out to be important? Yeah. And so like,
right, I know. Like, it's not a perfect study.
Exactly. It's not like I can, like the N is not one here, you know, and it is not like I looked and said, aha, the FISC is going to be the focus of immense public controversy over a long period of time from civil libertarians and from Congress and from defenders of the president and critics. I mean, no, I did not anticipate any of that. what I did anticipate is this is interesting, this is different, this is curious, and it raises some interesting issues and nobody's focused on it. And I do think, you know, what the part of it that you get credit for is for having the sort of like curiosity to say, okay, and that's enough, rather than to say, yeah, but everybody's over here looking at this, so I've got to be over here looking at this. That is an instinct that I think can really does serve you to sort of look where no one's looking.
But like, don't you think too that like, so this is interesting, but there is like you're raising kind of like the idea that there's a hindsight bias. Like it looks like we both got lucky with these things. It doesn't show all of the things that we were like like that we like all of the things that we falsely identified that didn't turn out. But I will say that like, there is like a certain like how did you have a certain robustness and pushback on looking at the FISA court? Did people tell you it was just going to be stupid and boring? I had like a solid mix of people. I had like Jack Balkin and Danielle Citron who believed in me and thought that what I was doing mattered, and that meant a lot. And then there were other people who just thought it was dumb and never going to matter. And
so a lot of people, like the thing about writing about institutions of the US federal government is that you'll never get somebody who says it's dumb, because it's there. I mean, it actually exists, and explicating things that exist, you won't get that kind of pushback on. On the other hand, what you will get is, yeah, but why aren't you covering the story of the day, whatever it is? And the story of that day, whatever that day was, is completely forgotten and unimportant today. I mean, like the list of things that I was asked, why aren't you covering, is very long, and none of them are as important as those things. So look, the other side of the point that Vishnu raises is your point about imposter syndrome. And I have a very complicated relationship with imposter syndrome, because on the one hand, I have never had it. And the reason is that I am an actual imposter. And, you know, I write about law for a living. I have no credential to do that. And I interact with distinguished law professors like Kate Klonick on the basis of equality and you know, despite being a total fraud. And there's nothing like actually getting sick to cure you of hypochondria. And there's nothing like actually being an imposter to cure you of imposter syndrome. And there's one really important caveat to this, which is this fall, I taught a class at the Harvard Law School. And I have interacted with Harvard law professors, you know, most days of my life for the last 20 years. I've never had imposter syndrome. But teaching a class in front of those students, I had imposter syndrome in a big way. And if any of them are watching, consider this my like confession. Yeah, I was totally afraid of them all every day. And so like, there are things that for all of us are, you know, complicated given our history that we feel fraudulent about. But the basic answer to me, to Vishnu's question is, please never don't explore something that in your soul you think is interesting, because it's not what other people are looking at. It's the thing that other people are looking at. That thing is transient. The thing that you discover that only you're interested in, maybe it's an eccentricity. And I think Kate and I have both had some eccentricities that are like, okay, we're interested in this, nobody else is.
Well, can we just have 1 second about that, like about the eccentricities? Because I do feel that there's a certain amount of buttoned upness that and performance that does kind of come with like kind of being at the upper echelon, like kind of places that like you're kind of all of a sudden I don't know, that you're kind of over this, all of a sudden you realize that there is just this, like people are not authentic about the fact that like they grew up like, I mean, I have a house, like we talked about, I'm in Cape Cod. My parents have this house in Cape Cod. But I am not like, I do not come from money. My parents are both like government employees, state government employees. Like they had like very little. We were only able to afford this house because we rented it every summer, and it paid for like the mortgage, and which meant that every time we came here for my entire childhood, it was doing scut work and like cleaning the house and maintaining it and getting ready for other people to live in, which is a very different thing. But you can say things like, I have a house in Cape Cod, and people here like that's like it's a dog whistle to like people with money or people of privilege, and that like kind of like ingratiates you in certain ways. But then it also isolates you, because there's like, if you say exactly what I just said, that it's not this huge fancy house or a mansion and we don't have maids that get it ready for us before we show up or whatever, that there's this I don't know, that there's just kind of like, I do feel like at a certain point there is also like this class thing that happens with like kind of the circles that we work around. Am I like total, is like, should I not talk about that? But just like, I kind of like think that it's it's something I've kind of felt for like a lot of the I don't know, for a lot of the time that I've kind of like been in this world. Just like how I was raised is very different than like a lot of the elite institutions I was lucky enough to be a part of.
Yeah, so I, in some way, in important ways, that is not a feature of my, like I come from, my parents are both biomedical research people. I come from a background that would be very comfortably part of the sort of elite, worlds that you're responding to. On the other hand, what's different about me is that actually I stopped and I never went to graduate school, and I just kind of worked as a journalist as a young adult, and that was very different from the circles that it's actually similar to your background, except that you then turned around and went to graduate school, but I never did. And so I ended up working in, kind of finding my way to the conversation that all of these people are part of through a very different route, and one that is in some ways still not entirely reputable. And so there are a lot of people who, instinctively kind of dismiss the sort of work that I do in a way that has class elements, although we are very much in a formal sense part of the same class, if that makes sense.
Without going too far adrift, and I do want to like bring Michael up for a second, I also think that this is fascinating, because I do think that like in the US, this is a pretty unique function of like basically being able to just go to a school, no matter what your background or how you talk or what your accent is, really, more or less, if you can perform and do something. Like, I'm not talking just pure meritocracy. Like, if you can basically like show people that you're creative and have good ideas, that like you can transcend this, and but that nonetheless, you're always going to like, there are people that come from all of that background, from the background of like 8 generations of Harvard, that feel like they don't deserve to be at Harvard, and people who come from like the projects and don't feel like they get to be at Harvard. Like, it cuts both ways. Anyways, I kind of wanted to talk to Michael. He actually DM'd me about a second ago. I'm going to read out his DM, and then I'm going to add, like, it'd be great if he could talk about it. So Michael is an old coworker of my partner, and a programmer. I think, Michael, I can't remember, you're gonna have to correct us if I'm wrong, but you're at Google still, you're living in Seattle, and you are an avid knitter and an all-around lovely person and a board game enthusiast. And you wrote to me, you've been watching the show since it started, which is super great. And You wrote that the difference between feeling like an imposter and being an imposter is that the real ones don't succeed. That doesn't invalidate the feeling, but a good Bayesian, having experienced enough counterexamples, ought to be willing to update those priors, even if the hindbrain disagrees. I kind of want to like talk to you more about what you mean by that. Are you there?
I am. Can you
Hey.
hear me all right?
Yeah, it's so nice to hear your voice.
Yeah, it has been a long time since we've actually talked in person.
I think the last time that we hung out, Michael, I remember this so vividly. I might have cooked chili for everyone that was so hot that literally no one besides me could possibly eat it. And while we were all living in Boston, like many moons ago, like 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah,
And
it would have been 2008 or 2009, as that's when John and I worked together.
yeah.
And yeah, I definitely, the moment that I actually remember was that our internet went out and a whole bunch of us went to the office to play video games. And apparently you all had sort of the same idea. So we ended up having kind of an impromptu office party.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Over the bagel shop.
Yep. Oh man. Yeah. In Porter Square.
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
No, right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Hey,
right.
just a quick interjection here. To all the Zoom bombers, and there have been 400 Zoom bombers who have posted questions. Can you be a little more creative, please? Because I'm getting sick. I'm getting sick of the repetitive shit. So if you want to Zoom bomb us and you write something interesting and offensive, maybe Kate or I will read it because it'll get a chuckle. But if you're just gonna do the racial epithets or telling one of us that we're fat or making sexual comments,
Yeah.
grow up.
Sorry,
It's
Michael, I
not going to
didn't
happen.
mean that.
So my challenge is say something funny enough that I actually laugh. See, like writing to me that I should shut up, and that I'm that's not doing it. Say something funny or amusing enough that we actually feel compelled to read it, and then you're the man.
Well, see, Ben, I think the problem here is that the whole point of things like Zoom bombing and most other trolling is that it doesn't require any effort. And what you're asking for intrinsically requires effort, requires thought and creative energy that sort of obviates the whole point of being a
what is it?
disastrous
It feels
troll.
like some power move. Like I was actually thinking about it. It feels like graffiti is like
It's-
actually what it most feels
But
like.
what do
for
people
someone who
get
plays-
out of somebody? What does somebody get out of posting 400 posts?
N-word, the N-word
With-
400,000 times.
Bitch or cow or you're fat or what are they getting out of this?
I think that in many
We
ways
just
it's,
crossed the 400. Oh,
it's that they
hippo,
can.
That's good.
And in a lot of ways, it's the human version of a denial of service attack, right? It's not that you actually
Good comparison.
care. It's not that you actually care whether or not that your message gets heard. You're basically saying, I can prevent you from having a pleasant conversation, even though I'm not even taking part in it. And
But
I don't know
they
what
can't.
motivates people
It's like
to
not
do that,
actually having much impact on the conversation. It's just requiring me to click dismiss a fair bit while we have it.
Yeah. But I mean, it forces us to essentially contend with it. And you have both had to comment on this fairly extensively in the previous episodes. Even though it isn't actually part of the conversation, it is in, I think, many ways like the kind of activity that popular political figures engage in. It doesn't matter that it's negative, that it's inflammatory. It forces everybody to pay attention to it rather than to important things that actually need to be addressed. And
good point. Okay,
I feel like that's actually, I think, the point that they're trying to make.
So good point. So let's declare a new law of in lieu of fun. If Kate is amenable to this, I propose a new law that not only is the chat closed so that it can't be Zoom bombed, but that under no circumstances will we ever again make reference to Zoom bombing. And so
Because
we
it
will
gives it power.
Because it gives it power. If we're forced to have a conversation about it, that is not as bad as us giving voice to it. But Michael is exactly right. It's a form of power. So let's just say the chat will be closed, and anybody who Zoom bombs us will be shouting into the ether, because we'll never make reference to it again.
But can we get back to Michael's really great question, which was just kind of like, well, Michael, you kind of reframe it. I would love it if you could kind of explain a little bit more. Like, I think that you're saying that like an imposter should know in some objective way that they've, like a person who has imposter syndrome should know in some objective way that they've like answered the, like that they've achieved some objective level of success. And so therefore the imposter syndrome should fall away. But I think that that's an inherent misunderstanding of the syndrome.
So I agree with you, and I think I perhaps have not conveyed what I was trying to convey clearly. I don't actually think that it should just magically disappear. I acknowledge that imposter syndrome is fundamentally an emotional relationship with your experience, not a factual one. But what I guess I'm saying is that, one of the things that I have had to contend with, as I also very much experience that feeling, is that sometimes you succeed at the things that you believe you're an imposter at, and you keep succeeding at them. And I have tried to use this as a mechanism to sort of keep under control the negative emotions that this provokes. This came up, and I made my comment to you initially because I was thinking about sort of the fact that, you and I both went to graduate school, and I think, judging from what you've said, we both had very similar feelings about our relationship to that graduate school. I did not ever feel that I belonged there.
Were you in tell people where you're at graduate school. Were you doing comp sci or physics?
Computer science. I am not a physicist in any meaningful wise. And so, I think that the real difference that I noticed really is that I did not finish grad school. I washed out of it. And to some extent, it only ever really requires doing the work, but that's never easy for anyone. So I think that sort of there's two pieces, I guess, that I'm trying to get at here. One is that I think we have to acknowledge that imposter syndrome is fundamentally not an accurate reflection either way of our actual competency, and that we should try, as to the extent possible, to assuage our emotional state using the factual results that we have obtained, like completing our degrees and publishing useful things, or whatever it is that is the metric in our area. And the other is that I think, I think that we have a cult in this, at least in American society, of kind of the creative genius. And we tend to think of someone who's really good at something as being someone who's natively really good at something. They sort of pop out being good at it. And those of us who have to work really hard to get good at what we do, which I actually think is most people, but I think I think we imagine that everybody else is just sort of naturally good at the things that they do. I think that leads us also to this idea that if we had to work hard at it, we don't really belong. And I think that actually is not, whether or not that helps us feel better about it, I think that that's actually not accurate. And so I want to try and sort of pull those two pieces apart. And that was sort of the intent I was trying to get at with my comment, not really to invalidate the feeling, because, as you say, you feel the way that you feel irrespective of whether it makes sense.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I do understand what you're saying. I guess what I would say is that the idea of imposter syndrome and the kind of the notion that you put forth of like, whether like you succeed or you don't succeed, here's the one thing as a rational, reasonable person that makes me feel afraid and validates my imposter syndrome. It is when I look at other people that are in my same position and I don't think their work is very good, or I think that they're frauds. So I am like, oh God, you have the same title as me and you've published in really good places. And this is a bad paper that does like says nothing and does nothing and like is poorly written and doesn't cite to the right type of like to the right literature. And then I'm kind of like, okay, well, if that person is at X school and publishing in X places, then what does any of this even mean? And what does it mean to be an imposter or not an imposter? And then it's all just about kind of some type of performance of self, right? Of like, just kind of like, it's whatever you make it to be, not to get all philosophical about it, but I just got philosophical.
I think you're absolutely right. I think also that, the point that you're touching on there, I think is actually perhaps even a third aspect of this, which is that society is poor at rewarding actual accomplishments. And we have a lot of mechanisms in place that are not really accurate measures, but proxies. So, for example, if someone successfully gets their paper, even bad one, published in a prestigious journal, then they are seen as being, an accomplished researcher or academic or whatever it is that they're doing. And in reality, that may or may not actually be the case, right? Someone who can objectively look at this paper and say this hypothetical paper that we're talking about here and say it's bad. And then it does make you wonder, right? How is it that we fail upwards so frequently, and those people who sometimes work very, very hard don't necessarily even have the success we feel they ought to? And I think that's actually a separate problem.
It is a separate problem. Ben, I kind of
But
want to hear
it
what
may
you have to say
lead
about
to
that.
someone feeling like an imposter, but I think it doesn't really bear on their actual accomplishments. It's a measure in some sense of where they fit into a larger social structure.
Yeah, like Ben, what does it mean that people who actually are shitty end up becoming famous or getting a lot of credit for being amazing when they're not?
So, look, there's something always infuriating about the march and triumph of mediocrity. And nowhere is that more infuriating than in those areas where, we're thinking about where excellence is at some level subjective, right? So mediocrity will never triumph in, say, marathon running, because actually the best marathon runners run faster than the mediocre marathon runners, right? Where there really are objective measures, mediocrity, I mean, it has its ways, right? Like performance enhancing drugs and whatnot, but there really is, in areas that are purely measurable, it really does have, there are limits. Now, the thing about intellectual areas is that these are always ultimately subjective. And that means that there are these people who do inexplicably well relative to how you think they should. And those people tend to have a few things in common. One is that they tend to come from backgrounds where they expect a certain measure of success and they feel entitled to it. They are disproportionately male. And they are also, and this is, I think, important, they are disproportionately charismatic. And I do not underestimate the role of charisma in elevating mediocre people to greatness that their merits do not entitle you to. And so you do have a bunch of people who are sort of temperamentally a little bit diffident, a little bit less willing to speak up, a little bit less willing to put themselves forward, who will disproportionately tend to be female, and who may come from backgrounds where they just don't expect that, they don't assume or feel entitled to a certain level of success. Those are going to be the people who are victims of this, and who will tend, by the way, to also feel like imposters when they nonetheless find themselves succeeding, because they are in fact dripping with talent and really interesting. And I don't know what to say about that, except that it's on all of us who, cultivate talent for a living, which, is a large part of what I try to do, that you have to be really aware of these things, because the person sitting in front of you may not be the person who will, raise her hand when you ask for a volunteer to do some spectacular project, but may be exactly the person you want to do that project. And, I don't really like I vacillate between a sense of it as a societal problem that we all just need to be sensitive to, and a sense of a lot of people needing a lot of tough love about, like, you have to stop acting like you're not worth it. And I think both of those honestly have a place. And when I'm talking to a person who behaves this way, like if I were talking to Kate a few years ago, I would be in tough love mode if I heard her saying like the things that she describes herself feeling then. I didn't know her then. But when
I mean,
I'm
you were really kind of tough love mode. Like the first thing that you said, one of the first things you said to me was like, you think you have imposter syndrome and you don't. Like that was one of the first, like you think you're an imposter and you're not an imposter. That was one of the first things you said to me. It was great.
Yeah, so like I do think there's an element of it that's, you know, pick yourself fucking off the floor and understand that you're actually great. And there's like a group of people who really need to be told that in an aggressive way, in a sort of confrontational way. But then there's the message to the broader world, which is stop assuming that greatness looks like what you expect it to look like. And you know, sometimes it is the person who is least likely to raise hands who is the person where the still waters run deep, and it is on you to notice that and to be the tough love for that person. And so I have very complicated feelings about it, and I you know, I honestly don't know what the optimal mix is, and I think it's often highly individualistic. So that's a kind of Rorschach test answer, I guess. Michael, thank you so much. This was fabulous.
Bye, Michael. We miss you.
We have a bunch of other questions, including I'm going to bring on Maggie Feldman-Pilch, who a lot of you will know, to ask the weekly food question. Maggie.
Hi, friends.
How are you?
Hey.
How
camera so we can see you.
Wait, how do I?
I don't think that this is the thing. I don't think that they can. I don't think that people have cameras anymore.
Oh, by the way, I'm going to violate the rule that I just set about the Zoom bombers. To the person who sent 200 times the question, "Can I have some pussy, please?" Please learn how to spell the word please before you ask 200 times for pussy. I mean, like you're not even going to get an answer if you can't spell please properly.
It was missing an E at the end.
Yeah.
It was missing an E at the end.
That's
another E.
200 times. Okay, Maggie, what's your question?
Okay, so I am somebody who has a very like average diet for myself, in the sense that like I eat pretty much the same thing at the same time every day. But when you're stuck in your house the whole time, you're like, maybe I should try other things. And so I'm thinking about trying other things. I'm not saying I've done it yet. And I'm wondering, are you guys eating like extra boring or extra fancy, or like what is like the coolest, fanciest thing you've had so far? I will say that today I had black truffle infused cheese and it was fucking delicious.
Where the fuck are you getting that?
The Remnants basket at Whole Foods, which if you are not spending time in the Remnants basket,
I'm in like
rural.
Wegmans
has it too.
All right, this is a great question.
I know, this is super fun.
What are you eating these days?
Oh God, it really depends. But it's I will say that there's I grew up as a person who cooked all the time. My mom made and my dad cooked every night, and I was a bring my lunch to school every day kid. And since living in New York for the past like 15 years, basically, I do takeout almost every night. And like occasionally we'll cook. I love cooking. I'm very good at it. And now I cook every night, and it's amazing how much time I have to now dedicate to cooking. like, and thinking about and meal planning and like how much time that takes, that I have forgotten how much time it takes. Does that make sense? We are eating normal stuff. Like I'm like I made like an white bean and herb sausage, like deliciousness. The other day we've like made at home our own like spaghetti sauce and pasta. I haven't been eating. This is funny, Maggie. We actually ordered Soylent because we are used to just having a quick meal in the mornings and like doing something like that. We were having smoothies more often. I made stuffed peppers the other day. I don't know. But then like I have these moments where I'm just starving and I eat junk food. And now I understand I never used to have junk food around at all. Like I just like wouldn't. And now I'm like, okay, now I want some potato chips and cream cheese. And that's like a thing that I have. It's like the Cape Cod dark russet potato chips and like Philadelphia cream cheese. It's like my thing. I don't have a sweet tooth very much. Anyway, yeah, no, that's kind of it.
Yeah, so I have a similar thing. I have been, for the last few years, feeling guilty about the number of times we order out rather than cooking, or we go out. And now I feel guilty about the amount we're cooking rather than ordering out, because all of our local restaurants, including some that we really have relationships with the owners of, are in full takeout mode. And, I feel a real obligation to try to keep them in business and try to help them survive this. And so on the one hand, I feel like, hey, finally we're cooking at home a lot. And on the other hand, every day we cook at home, I think, shouldn't we order out tonight, in a kind of public service sort of way? And I feel kind of ridiculous about the inversion of my normal guilt virtue feelings, but I have been cooking a lot. How much has my diet changed as a result? It's definitely gotten better. Eating less, thinking more about what I'm going to eat, or eating more in mealtime and less snacking constantly. Have I been trying a lot of new things? No, although it's funny you mentioned truffles, because a rather large amount of truffles and truffle oil showed up at my house not too long ago. So I've been
Lucky
thinking
you.
about things to do with truffles, as Maggie knows, because I texted her the other day, what should I do with some black truffles? So that's what I can tell you about my diet.
Can we mention exercise? I can show my video.
Oh yeah, show your video, because Kate had like a total badass, like,
I have a whole thing that's happening in my life that is kind of like we are in Cape Cod. It's been raining for 5 days. We haven't been able to go outside. We're building a garden. We're used to going to like the gym and whatever. And so we've been doing a lot of kind of outdoor work as a means of exercise. And anyways, my partner decided to chop up this tree stump today. And so I decided that I would help. He'd been at this for like a great deal of time before I got there, but this is the video. I will play this briefly. Here, put it. That was pretty much it.
But that is super excellent that you gave out a bellowing roar when you did it.
We're just having fun. We're just trying to like survive. It's the little things.
Yeah,
it was nice to be outside today.
I've been spending some time indoors today with my son 3D printing masks. So that's been, it does not give rise to bellowing roars, however. Andrew Green,
Hi.
you have a question.
Yeah, I was and I'm sorry to change the topic to something legal related because you know, I love hearing about people's dining experiences during this situation, and I've been eating great, so because I love to cook. But I was kind of curious about the kind of constitutional implications of the enforcement of some of these stay-home orders, and of course, the social distancing and the stay home is really critically important. But I'm kind of curious to understand what we think the police can really do legally to enforce these sort of things, and what limits are there, if any, in this circumstance, and possibly on a longer term question, what could we do sort of long-term planning wise to make sure that we have the sort of legal infrastructure in place to make sure that we can sort of lock down society, but kind of do so within the bounds of the Constitution and our rights?
Great question. So it's funny that you ask it, because a number of years ago, then law student named Adam Klein, who is now has ceased to be a law student and is now the chair of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. And I wrote a paper about various authorities to engage in preventive detention. And the paper contains a substantial section on the powers of isolation and quarantine, which were quite obscure at the time, but are actually very substantial. And the basic answer to your question is that these cases, which grew up mostly in the context of typhoid and cholera and other communicable diseases of the sort of late 19th and early 20th centuries, they give the government, state governments mostly, very broad powers to detain people who are communicable and not whose isolation, and to isolate them while they pose a public health threat.
Do you think that that's different? Sorry, not to interrupt, but do you think that it matters that there's public health related reasons for the plagues versus like Korematsu and like kind of other types of national security emergency powers? Like, is it emergency powers writ large, or do you think that they're greater ones when there's like some type of biohazard?
No, so I think the larger thesis of Adam and my paper is that there's actually much more preventive detention authority in US law and practice than people acknowledge, and that we actually have a fair number of areas where we allow preventive detention. We just generally don't call it that. And so this is a good example. We don't call it preventive detention, we call it isolation and quarantine. I do think these powers are less controversial than some other preventive detention authorities and coercive police power authorities, partly because the nature of the threat is not disputed. So to use your example of Korematsu, there was, the nature of the threat was really bound up in xenophobic racism. And the actual threat was, very debatable or even de minimis. And so in retrospect, and for many people, including some justices of the Supreme Court at the time, that power looked to be, and in fact, I think was, an expression of invidious discrimination rather than a legitimate preventive action for the safety and security of people. Conversely, the detention of Typhoid Mary, whose name has come down through she was a genuine menace to society, and she got a lot of people sick and got a lot of people killed, and her detention was not the idea that there is some authority to detain people who are not isolating, and in circumstances where they carry a deadly communicable disease, that is not one that has been especially controversial, though it has given rise to lots of litigation. The novelty of the current situation is that instead of detaining individuals who are isolating, they're basically trying to isolate everybody by locking down society. So far, this has not been litigated, I think, because most people just kind of accept.
None of this stuff is litigated at the time because of the incredible amount of deference that the government is given in these emergency powers, right?
It's true, although the detentions and isolations of individuals often get litigated, and that's why we have case law. And the case law is pretty permissive because the threat is very real, and it's not obvious if the government say we're going to just say, okay, well, we don't want to trample on anybody's civil liberties, so we're going to just kind of let the virus spread. We're going to ask very nicely that people stay home. It's not obvious that the consequences of that would not be a lot of deaths. And so the case law is permissive here for a reason. And the general rule, to go back to your original question, is that detention or coercive measures are acceptable, provided that the predicate is real, and the measure in question is, there's a test that's roughly the least restrictive mean. It correlates roughly with the least restrictive means. And so, I think it's probably the worst idea in the world, except for all the others. I've never heard an alternative to it that does not involve the possibility of significant additional communicative illness. And so I think it's a really interesting problem. It's one that, we're going to live with, frankly, until we have a vaccine. The question we have to ask ourselves is whether we prefer a regime like this to the way we dealt with this in the past, which was simply to allow large numbers of people to die.
Yeah. So on that uplifting note, Ben, you wrote, and I'm going to tweet it out in a second, but you wrote an incredible piece that was really great. It really was fantastic. You wrote an incredible piece for Passover that is about all of the plagues and trying to find an upside in every plague. Is that
I couldn't find a good upside to lice.
Okay, you want to know? Here's a good upside. You want to know how I contracted lice when I was a child for the first time?
Mm-hmm.
I was in the Chuck E. Cheese ball pit in like Henrietta, New York, and I was like, my mom, like I got out, and my mom was like, "That's gross," and I feel like like maybe that's a giant contagion zone. And then sure enough, like I got lice. Like, anyways. And there was no upside after that, but the ball pit was an upside.
So like that's like saying there's an upside to sexually transmitted diseases, which is the sex. I think that's.
Oh God, I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. No. Like I think it's like it's telling the story from too early a point.
Okay, but walk us through your piece because I think that it is so excellent. I'm going to pull it up so that we can
I don't have
it, but tell us basically about researching it because I think it's super fun.
Okay, so Batya Ungar Sargon from the Forward, which is a Jewish newspaper in New York, wrote me and asked me would I write some reflections on on plagues for the Passover edition, and I was feeling impish, and so I thought, I'm lying outside in my hammock.
Yeah, can I actually just read the lead? It's so
Sure.
good. As I write these words, I am lying on a hammock next to a fire burning an outdoor fireplace on my porch. A glass of single malt scotch is in my hand. The Mozart second horn concerto is playing in the background. As plagues that shut society down go, this one certainly has its upsides. And I think
Yeah.
I love that. I think that this is kind of like, it captures the privilege and also the sad reality and loneliness of this plague, in a sense, that is like very difficult to talk about.
Right. So I'm sitting there and like, we're all like, upset about the fate of the world and the economy is crashing and, large numbers of people are dying. But like, what does it actually mean for me? It's like I'm in a state of relaxation at home with my family in not luxurious conditions, but very pleasant conditions, doing whatever the heck I want to do. And this is a state that for billions of people all through history would have been regarded as the ultimate leisure. And I was just very struck by the irony of that. And then, what's more, for the first time in months, I'm caught up on my email.
Right.
Which
That is
is
like, I really hate you for that, by the way, because I am the opposite of caught up on my email.
you had a paper to finish.
It's not just the paper. I must get like all of my students are freaking the F out. Like they're all like, I mean, like, oh my God. It's like, I can't make class. I can make class. And then also really real things. Hey, Professor Klonick, can you get me a landlord tenant lawyer in New York because I'm being evicted from my apartment? Like, I mean, it's just really terrifying. And my parents are sick. I'm going to be out of class for this. It's just like the whole thing is like, my inbox is like a nightmare and I'm barely getting through it.
Yeah. So then I thought, well, okay, like the 10 plagues, maybe they had upsides too. And so I started thinking, all right, well, what would be the upside of the 10 plagues? So you come to the first plague, and it's that the Nile turns into blood. And just as I'm thinking about this, my Twitter feed has a notice from the Red Cross that we have a critical blood shortage.
That's actually super clever of you. I hope it's O negative blood.
Well, we don't know what blood type the Nile was, but I would say a river full of any kind of blood right now would probably be helpful. And
no, if it was actually intermingled, it would be the opposite of helpful. It would just be a giant sludge of blood.
Okay, but like it doesn't say that it wasn't O negative blood.
Okay.
And like I just think we should take so then second plague is frogs, an abundance of frogs. Now, I have been worried for years now about all these stories I read about how the amphibians around the world are dying off. It's super scary. There is not an abundance of frogs right now. And so the Bible goes a little too far with it. They're going to be in your bedroom and under your sheets and in your bread kneading. And all right, I don't need that. But that the Potomac should bring forth frogs in abundance, that sounds great.
They're super cute.
They're really cute and they make nice noises and they're going extinct. And so then I was thinking okay,
get rid of bugs.
How far can we go with this? Which other plagues have bright sides? So what I tried to do was,
it's a wonderful conceit. It's just really fun.
So I tried to come up with a bright side of all plagues. I didn't manage it for lice. If anybody has a bright side of lice or locust infestations, which by the way are happening right now in Yemen and
I would actually say locust infestations really, really hard to find a bright side to those.
Yeah, so there were
kill everything.
A few of them I couldn't manage it, but I even came up with a bright side for the killing of the firstborn, and I even came up with a bright side of boils, which having had boils, which are incredibly painful and miserable.
Can I
have to say I was
question?
Really proud of that. Yeah.
So when I was growing up, I read a lot of Roald Dahl, like Fantastic Mr. Fox and BFG and Matilda. and the twits and all of them. And they always describe people as having these boils, like boils on their face or boils, like, and like on the tip of their nose. And I do not understand and have never understood whether boil is just another word for like a zit or whether it is something entirely different. And I just like could never, like I had no conception when they used this term, except that it was obviously in context, like not a great thing.
Yeah,
I
it's
never
really
understood that like what it exactly was.
So a boil is caused by the staph bacteria.
Oh, so it's like an
And
actual, it's an, like it's almost like a cyst or like an abscess.
it is a large, extremely painful
Oh.
cyst that generally erupts in your armpit, or they show up in like uncomfortably inconvenient
Well, it sounds like they
places.
show up around lymph nodes.
Yeah, and they hurt a lot. I mean, it's like it's no joke pain, and they can be kind of hard to get rid of because staph is sometimes antibiotic resistant, and so some people are susceptible to them. I've had boils once, and made me pity Pharaoh. Let's put it that way. It was really like really unpleasant. But there's a bright side. The bright side is antibiotics. We didn't, when Pharaoh
But this
got
is no longer a
boils.
plague that can like plague us.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, there's antibiotic resistant staph and everything. But for most cases of boils, you pop 10 days of, your Zithro pack and it disappears. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think that that's a great place to end for today. Like I kind of like, you know what? The plus side of of today's plague was that I got outside and we got the stump out of the ground.
And you got to roar.
I roared. I don't know. It was like I got to like reconnect with an old friend that I haven't seen in 10 years. Like we got some great questions from the audience. I think I've mentioned a few times that the last couple of weeks I've been so busy and kind of flat out answering questions, like putting out fires like so quickly that I have not even really looked at I haven't spent a ton of time obsessing over the news or how all this is going. I do the show with you. I don't spend a ton of time looking at stuff. And in the last couple of days, things have finally started to slow down and I've started to look at stuff. And like last night, I couldn't sleep for the first time. It was like the whole panic of like social order collapsing around us or like, kind of hit me. And then I was like, but until then, I have been. And that's why I texted you that I said that we were like, that we were kind of like the USO, that we were more like the USO and Wikipedia than we were like an plus improv. But like I liked the USO. Like we are like there's like I think that there's a part of like this keeps up my morale personally. That it keeps up other people's morale is great. I hope so. But I think that there's something. It's really hard to figure out what to do for others or for yourself right now.
Indeed. Before we go, we have 8 questions pending in the queue from real people. So I think we should do like a lightning round where we just read the questions and give quick answers.
Okay, go ahead.
Does that
you
work
do the
for
first
you?
one.
All right, the first one, yeah, from Christopher Hanelli is, what do you think a guy like James Comey is thinking now, considering all the dumpster fire this administration has caused? I read his book and I liked it. So I'm a little bit encumbered in addressing that because Jim and I are good friends and we talk all the time, and I sort of know the answer to that question. And I also don't want to speak for him. He has talked about that a lot, and how he regards this administration and his own role in various aspects of it, including in the book that the question refers to. And I don't feel comfortable going beyond on his behalf what he's said, except to say that like the answer to that question is very much in the public record. And I'm sorry to be coy about it, but just out of respect for the confidentiality of our relationship, I don't think I should address it directly.
So I'll take Vishnu's comment next, which I think is really good, which is Kate and Michael, did you feel the same way? And I think he's referring to saying like about our imposter syndrome during undergrad. My sense was that graduate school would feel like more of an equalizer than undergrad, meaning if you got accepted, you were more likely to feel deserving of being there. I actually think that like, and I think most people would say this, and I think that imposter syndrome is predominantly like addressed as like a thing among graduate students because they feel like all of a sudden they're in this liminal stage between being students still and trying to pretend to become or to emulate like the becoming of the people that they're like being taught by. And so that I would say it's the opposite, that like basically like you feel like you've faked everything you've done in undergrad and none of it mattered, and you get accepted to this program and you're like, okay, now I have to prove myself and like prove myself to these people who really will know if I'm faking it. And that's kind of I think that that's kind of how that question works out.
All right, a comment from Leland, faithful viewer Leland. I come from academics. My father was a computer science professor. My brother is a physics professor. I never graduated. Once one of the influences that caused me to leave school was a wealthy and scientifically successful individual who essentially told me not to pursue school, but to learn practically. It was helpful, but I think more than anything else, being under active mentorship by someone always changes things. Graduate school is another form of active mentorship by someone who is successful in the field, hopefully. Kate, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you had my active mentor on before, or two of them this week, Danielle and Jack, and like it made all the difference. If like they hadn't been there, I would have given up. So I think that that's completely true.
Josh Jacobson writes, I started reading Lawfare a couple of years ago, and it has gotten me much more interested in a career in public service / government. How does one make a mid-career change from working in tech to being a public servant? So first of all, Josh, I just want to say of all the comments that I have gotten recently about Lawfare and its role in people's lives, that is one of my absolute favorites, because it is centrally about, Lawfare is centrally about helping people in public service do their jobs better. And it's just like really great to hear that it is actually also inspiring people to imagine careers in public service. So the answer to your question, I can't be very specific about, because there's no, as with all mid-career changes, the answers are always highly individualized to the person and the specific backgrounds that they have and also what they want. I will say that the government needs people who have significant tech experience in that expertise. They need it badly. Across a wide range of areas. The intelligence community needs people. The law enforcement world needs people. All kinds of components of the government outside the national security space as well need people with tech backgrounds. And so without knowing more about the background and the kind of things you're interested in, I can't be very specific, except to say that people like you are highly sought after as a general matter.
Yeah. Robin wants to know, aside from hosting a great podcast, that means you, Ben, what podcast do you listen to for fun?
Okay, so there are two podcasts that I listen to, three that I listen to almost every day. One is the Daily from the New York Times. The second is Mike Pesca's podcast, The Gist. I think Mike Pesca is one of the best talkers and I've ever heard on any subject. I think he's super smart. He's a great interviewer, and I just love hearing him talk. And the third is Charlie Sykes's podcast, The Bulwark podcast, which is a publication the Bulwark is a publication around which the Never Trump conservative movement has kind of crystallized. And I think Charlie, who's an old time conservative radio talk show host, has just done a fabulous job making the transition to this moment, and has constantly interesting people with very diverse ideological conversations on it. And I just think they've done a fabulous job being interesting every day. So those are kind of my daily podcasts. My more generally, the Talking Politics podcast, which is out of Cambridge University and the London Review of Books, is completely spectacular. And Helen Thompson and David Runciman deserve an immense amount of credit for it. There's a lot of other stuff I listen to too, but those are, for regular listening day in, day out on our current situation, both domestically and internationally. I think those are really just fabulous pieces of work.
I don't know if I understand the next question, but
I don't either. So let's skip it.
Okay. And then let's skip the next one because that's personal to me. I have no idea who that person is. So
okay, we are going to ignore the other questions, and that wraps us for today.
Yeah, awesome. Tomorrow we're back on with mystery guests, which are just random people that we've pulled from the audience. Oh my gosh, what a thoughtful end to our Zoom bombing experience. I think that, so tomorrow we're going to do mystery guests. Do not know who's going to come on. I think we're just going to do one mystery guest each is what we decided, Ben.
Yeah, unless one of them wants to invite somebody, in which case we're certainly not
We'll
going to
give them the option of doing that. Then they can or they cannot. In the meantime, no one asked me, but if you want to know some good TV shows to watch, I would highly recommend Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Cheers. What, Ben?
No, I only just noticed that the cast you were with is a different cast than the cast you were with.
I feel like everybody knows your name in lieu of show, unless you're an anonymous Zoom bomber, in which case your name is Mike Hunt, and we know who you are also.
All right. Until tomorrow, we don't have fun anymore, but we, in lieu of fun, we'll be back tomorrow at 5. Thank you to everybody whose questions we addressed, and to the Zoom bombers. How many of them were there today?
I think we have going on 650 Zoom bombs, even though we shut down chat and they're just in the Q&A.
Yeah, and so thank you to everybody who sent us the N-word over and over again. And thank you to the people who asked for pussy, please, but couldn't spell it, and all the others. And Kate, thank you. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Over and out.